Welcome back. I'm speaking with Richard Sakwa. He's a professor of Russian and European politics at the University of Kent in the UK. His latest book is Frontline Ukraine, Crisis in the Borderlands. Thank you again for joining me, Professor.
My pleasure.
So let's start with Poland here. Polish officials recently said that an attack on Poland would be an attack on NATO, and the Russian envoy to NATO replied by saying that that was absurd, given that Russia has no plans to attack Poland. Explain why Poland is so concerned about a potential Russian attack here.
Well, I must say that I'm the last person to ask that, in the sense that I think it's absurd, indeed, as the Russians responded. And indeed, all the fears in the Baltic republics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania of a potential Russian attack. They fundamentally misunderstand what is going on in Russia. It's a function, if you like, of domestic politics, and it's a function of the last 25 years in which we were unable to overcome Cold War thinking. So the great danger is that NATO has enlarged, the European Union has enlarged, but what it failed to do was to socialize these countries in overcoming the legacy of historical grievances. Now, as a Pole, I understand that there is a heavy burden of history, bad relations between Poland and formerly the Soviet Union and today Russia. But the whole point of the European Union, and indeed NATO, was to overcome this and to establish a new peace order. Instead, what has actually happened is that the unsocialized or the undigested anger about the past has fed back into NATO and thus changed the very nature of NATO from being a peace project of maintaining the peace and defensive into something else. At the same time, NATO is embedded in a military culture, institutions and ideas that also have not been transcended since the end of the Cold War. So, at the slightest provocation, in a sense, NATO now exists to manage the threats created by its own existence. This is the huge paradox. It's now found a meaning and purpose because it was losing it, of course, in the 25 years until 2014. Now it's back in business, doing what it was established to do, and that is to contain Russia. And countries like Poland have always been worried about need to hedge against a potential, reborn and more aggressive Russia. But by hedging for that eventuality, they are in danger of making their fear become an actual fact. And that is the enormously closed logic in which we find ourselves and which will be on display at the Warsaw Summit of NATO on the 8th and 9th of July coming up.
Difficult times. One thing that I was reminded of when you were talking about the role of NATO, it's very interesting that when you walk into the Pentagon, you see every single member of the NATO alliance with their own offices inside the Pentagon, hardly a peacekeeping force because it is so linked to the objectives of the Pentagon. Your thoughts on what will happen at this meeting and also I mentioned that the U.S. has allocated and assumes 73% of the budget of NATO. How much of this contention with Russia is playing into this exercise that's going on that we were talking about earlier in segment 1?
At the moment, the situation is feeding upon itself, and it's in danger of getting into such a dangerous self-eating loop, if you like, that I actually, and not only me, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, are warning that we are in danger of sleepwalking into a major confrontation. Unfortunately, the language at the moment is endless escalation. You may have seen Victoria Nuland at Congress the other day talking about the danger dangers from Russia. So, yes, the forthcoming summit will see the United States asking its European allies to take on a greater share of the burden. As you note, at the moment it's the United States which takes the lion's share of the burden. But what does this mean? It means the remilitarization of European politics. We really had thought after the end of the Cold War in 1989-91 that we could establish a new peace order, instead of which we're talking about a new war order, we're talking about a new division of Europe, this time from Narva in the Baltic all the way down to Mariupol on the Sea of Azov. Both sides now reinforcing this line of division. The Russians, as I mentioned, are setting up 3 new divisions to defend what they consider the traditional invasion route from the west across the great North European plain. On the other side, countries like Poland, Lithuania, whipping up fear of a Russian aggression, which both sides are completely missing the point that no one ultimately is threatening the other, but it's a military establishment and, if you like, a civilian establishment based on Cold War ideologies, which is, as I say, in this exceptionally dangerous loop, and a situation in which a small incident, an accident, a small provocation somewhere or other could lead to a very, very swift escalation. I mentioned the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. They have now set the Doomsday clock at 3 minutes to midnight. This is as close to midnight, i.e. as close to Armageddon, as it has been over the last 50 years since it was established, equivalent to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 and other dangerous incidents of the Cold War. In other words, we're back to where we began. And so I really do call upon NATO and Russians and everybody, we must find a way to de-escalate, and sending more forces, more military, more anti-ballistic weapons in Poland and Romania, and new divisions on the other side. We must establish a new dynamic of dialogue. The worst thing at Warsaw is that the European Union now is going to work more closely with NATO. Yes, there are common challenges. We do want them to work together if it was within the framework of peace. But if it's in the framework of contention, conflict, then I think that we are in danger of slipping into a very dangerous situation, as dangerous as it was in 1914.
Now, the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, has said that one should not worry about what's going on and the exercise is underway. Let's take a look.
Everything we do is defensive, and it is proportionate, and it's absolutely in line with our international commitments. The exercise Anaconda is a Polish-led exercise where the readiness of the forces are tested, and the Polish armed forces are exercising together with troops from different NATO allied countries. But again, this is something which is part of an exercise program. It's announced, it's transparent, so there is no reason that this should create any concern.
What talks or negotiations are underway, given that Russia does have an envoy at NATO? They must be in discussion.
Hardly any discussions. The NATO-Russia Council met a couple of weeks ago, and all it did was to show just how wide the sides are apart from each other. After the events of 2014 in Ukraine, NATO cut off almost all contacts with Russia. Yes, Sergei Lavrov meets quite frequently with Secretary of State John Kerry, but that's the main channel of communication at the moment. So in terms of institutional engagement, there's almost none. And this is a betrayal, if you like, of the last 25 years with the NATO-Russia Council, the founding act in 1997, which said that there would be no permanent forces in the countries to which NATO has enlarged. The big picture, if I may just say this, is that Russia, since the end of the Cold War, really has tried and wanted to join this, what I call this sort of a new West or an enlarged West, but it wanted to join it as an equal partner. This would have meant the United States sharing hegemony or leadership with Russia and other countries, and it simply was not accepted or able to do so. Yes, it would have been very tough and very hard to establish this expanded security community, but ultimately that was really what we had to do, and we still have to do it. So, in other words, we really have to start thinking in new terms. It's no good simply saying NATO is all about peace, Jens Stoltenberg saying it doesn't threaten Russia. Well, what on earth is it all about with 30-odd thousand troops on Russia's borders? And also the other exercises, bolt-ops in the sea. And so this is a series of 3 major enterprises in the Baltic countries, in the Baltic Sea, and this one in Poland. So it's obvious who they're worried about. And so Russia is obviously in this cycle, as I say, of escalation. Everybody says it's not against you, but each one is adding yet more fires and more coals to the fires, which may end up raging uncontrollably.
Richard Sakwa, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very serious situation, and we are hoping that you will come back on The Real News and continue to do some of this analysis.
Love to. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News Network.